As of today, historians have documented over 5,000 years of recorded human history. That's an immense timeline that encompasses everything from ancient civilizations to modern advancements. However, it is far too much to fit into a single textbook. As a result, history books tend to highlight major events, battles, and figures that shaped the world as we know it. But with the vast wealth of information now at our fingertips, it has become increasingly clear that history wasn't just made up of the well-known facts we learned in school. In fact, many of the stories that make up our past are far weirder, darker, and downright chilling than we could ever imagine. With this in mind, imagine for a moment that you're back in school, sitting in your history class, but this time, your teacher is presenting a much creepier version of history. One that was intentionally omitted from textbooks. These bizarre, often stomach-churning events were deemed too strange or horrifying for public consumption, but they're far too fascinating to ignore. So, let's take a deep dive into some of the most bizarre and unsettling historical facts that school textbooks never taught you. These chilling episodes remind us that, throughout history, truth has sometimes been stranger and far darker than fiction. 1. The woman who convincingly gave birth to rabbits. In the 18th century, there was a woman named Mary Toft from Surrey, England, who managed to convince doctors that she was giving birth to rabbits. It all began when she suddenly went into labor one day, much to the surprise of her family. There was just one problem. Nobody had known she was pregnant. To make matters even more bizarre, what Mary gave birth to wasn't a human child, but a dead rabbit. An obstetrician named John Howard was called in to examine the strange case. He was so convinced by her story that he sent letters of the miraculous births to some of the best doctors in England. On one occasion, Mary reportedly gave birth to 9 dead rabbits. In an attempt to verify the claims, King George sent his own royal doctor to investigate. The doctor witnessed Mary's 15th rabbit birth, and, believing it to be a medical miracle, took the dead rabbits back to London to show his colleagues. However, after some serious examination, it was discovered that the bunnies had no umbilical cords, and they all contained corn in their stomachs. This was clear evidence that they hadn't been born in her womb. As it turned out, Mary had been inserting the dead rabbits into her body to simulate the appearance of birth. The gruesome deception was finally uncovered, but not before it managed to fool some of the best medical minds in England. 2. The gruesome history of lobotomy in America. The history of lobotomy, particularly in the United States, is nothing short of horrific. In 1936, a man named Walter Freeman took a European brain surgery called the lobotomy and modified it into a procedure that would eventually be performed on tens of thousands of patients in America. Freeman's method involved drilling 2 holes, about 3 centimeters deep, into the skull and then pouring alcohol into the frontal lobes to disrupt neural pathways. At the time, it was believed that this procedure could treat mental illnesses like depression and OCD. In 1945, Freeman invented the transorbital lobotomy, which involved inserting an iced pick-like instrument into the eye socket and hammering it into the brain. This technique quickly became known as the iced pick lobotomy. Unfortunately, Freeman became careless with his procedures. He performed as many as 25 lobotomies in a single day, often without wearing gloves or properly sterilizing his instruments. In some cases, he performed lobotomies without anesthesia, and some of his procedures were even done in a van. By the 1960s, lobotomy had been discredited as a junk science, but not before approximately 50,000 people had undergone the procedure. The gruesome history of lobotomy remains one of the darkest chapters in medical history. 3. Arsenic in clothing. Before 1775, creating green fabric for clothing was a difficult process, making it a color reserved only for royalty and the wealthy. However, a chemist named Carl Wilhelm Scheele discovered a yellowish-green pigment made from arsenic, which came to be known as Scheele's green. This discovery led to a massive demand for the vibrant color, which was used widely in clothing, wallpaper, paint, toys, and even food coloring. The public was largely unaware of the toxic nature of this new green pigment. It wasn't until years later that people realized that long-term exposure to arsenic could cause serious health complications, including skin lesions, organ failure, and even death. The worst part: some of the most fashionable people in Europe were unknowingly poisoning themselves with this bright green pigment, which was also used in the manufacture of children's toys and accessories. 4. Mike the Headless Chicken. In 1945, a chicken named Mike became famous for living for 18 months without a head. On September 10, 1945, Lloyd and Clara Olson were slaughtering chickens on their farm in Fruita, Colorado, when they decapitated one particular chicken. But instead of dying, the chicken ran around the yard. Normally, decapitated chickens only move for a few seconds due to reflex actions, but this chicken seemed to defy biology. They placed Mike the Headless Chicken in a crate, and the next morning, he was still alive. 2 weeks later, a sideshow promoter named Hope Wade suggested they take Mike on a nationwide tour. Despite being headless, Mike survived by feeding him liquid food and water through a dropper. He even managed to gain weight. For 18 months, Mike traveled the country, drawing crowds wherever he went. Tragically, Mike's tour came to an end when he choked to death in the middle of the night after his owners failed to properly feed him. Mike's strange survival story remains one of the most bizarre animal phenomena in history. 5. The European zombie outbreak of 1494. While the Renaissance period is often celebrated for its masterpieces in art and culture, it also had a dark side that many historians prefer to overlook. In 1494, after Columbus' voyage to the Americas, sailors brought back a terrifying disease, syphilis. At the time, the disease was more severe and progressed rapidly, leaving its victims with hideous lesions and disfigurations. This early version of syphilis, known as supersyphilis or the Great Pox, caused the skin to rot away, leaving its victims with gruesome ulcers and sometimes even losing their noses, lips, and other body parts. People were terrified of those affected by the disease, and the infected were often ostracized. The condition led to the creation of a very real, zombie-like apocalypse, with the afflicted wandering around with a decaying appearance and a slow, shuffling gait. The widespread fear and horror surrounding this outbreak marked it as one of Europe's darkest chapters. 6. The Devil's Bible. The Codex Gigas, also known as the Devil's Bible, is a 13th century manuscript from Bohemia that is considered the largest Latin manuscript in the world. This enormous book measures 3 feet in length, is 20 inches thick, and weighs an incredible 165 pounds. It is often referred to as the Devil's Bible due to its eerie contents, including a full-page portrait of Satan. The legends surrounding this book suggest that a monk, condemned to death, made a deal with the devil in order to escape execution. In exchange for his soul, the monk requested the devil's help in completing the manuscript, which was to be written in a single night. According to the story, the devil completed the manuscript, and as a tribute, the monk drew Satan's portrait in the book. The Codex Gigas contains a full version of the Bible, though it notably omits the book of Genesis, along with historical texts, magic formulas, and spells. 7. The Souls of Purgatory Museum. In Rome, there is a small museum called the Museum of the Souls in Purgatory, which displays items believed to have been touched by the souls of those trapped in purgatory. The museum's collection includes Bibles, prayer books, clothing, and even tabletop objects, all of which bear scorched handprints. These items are believed to have been marked by souls trying to communicate with the living, begging them to pray harder so they could ascend to heaven. The legend dates back to 1897 when a fire broke out in the Chapel of the Rosary, leaving behind the image of a human face on the wall. The French missionary Victor Jouer, who believed this was the work of a deceased soul, began collecting items from around the world that were supposedly touched by souls in purgatory. The museum remains a deeply spiritual and eerie testament to Catholic beliefs about life after death. 8. The Battle of Pelium. Egypt versus Persia. In 525 BCE, Egypt found itself at war with Persia in one of the strangest battles in ancient history. The Persian king, who was experienced in military tactics, devised a cunning plan to exploit one of Egypt's most sacred beliefs: their reverence for animals, particularly cats. In Egyptian culture, cats were associated with the goddess Bastet, and the punishment for killing a cat was death. Knowing this, the Persian king ordered his soldiers to paint images of Bastet on their shields and to place cats, dogs, and other sacred animals at the front lines. When the Egyptian soldiers saw the cats and other revered animals, they hesitated, unable to harm them, and eventually, they fled the battlefield. This strange and somewhat disturbing battle marked the fall of ancient Egypt, and the region soon came under Persian control before later being annexed by the Roman Empire. 9. Medieval men and the removal of the left testicle. During the Middle Ages, a strange and misguided belief prevailed that the left testicle produced female sperm, while the right testicle produced male sperm. This theory, proposed by Aristotle in 330 BCE, led men in the Middle Ages to believe that if they wanted to ensure the birth of a son, they would have to remove their left testicle. In an extreme and misguided attempt to control the sex of their offspring, men actually had their left testicles removed. However, it didn't take long for people to realize that the theory was wrong, and even men with only one testicle still had a 50% chance of having a girl. Once this fact became known, the practice gradually stopped, but not before some men had sacrificed their health in the misguided pursuit of a male hair. 10. The Mickey Mouse gas mask. During World War II, the Sun Rubber Company designed a gas mask for children that featured the smiling face of Mickey Mouse. This gas mask was designed to be less frightening for children, who might need protection in the event of chemical warfare on U.S. soil. Walt Disney himself collaborated on the design of this mask, aiming to make it more palatable to children. The masks were produced in limited numbers. Only about 1,000 were ever made, but they remain an unsettling reminder of the war. Though they may seem odd or even creepy today, the Mickey Mouse gas mask was a far more innocuous design than the terrifying British version, which contained asbestos. Today, only a handful of these masks still exist in private collections, serving as a reminder of the bizarre and unsettling nature of wartime innovation. History is full of bizarre, creepy, and sometimes downright disturbing events. While school textbooks generally focus on the more appropriate aspects of the past, these unsettling moments shed light on the darker and weirder side of human existence. From deceptive pregnancies to medical atrocities and bizarre wartime innovations, these facts prove that truth really is stranger than fiction. The next time you crack open a history book, remember that there may be a hidden, eerie tale waiting just beneath the surface.